The United States supports the Philippines' enactment of the Maritime Zones Act, signed into law by President Marcos on November 8, 2024. The Maritime Zones Act aligns Philippine domestic laws with the 1982 Law of the Sea Convention and the 2016 Arbitral Tribunal ruling. This law defines the Philippines' internal waters, archipelagic waters, territorial sea, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, and continental shelf in line with the convention. Many other nations, including fellow members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, have enacted similar legislation over the years. The passage of the Maritime Zones Act by the Philippines is a routine matter and further clarifies Philippine maritime law. The United States values Philippine leadership in upholding international law, particularly in the South China Sea, and calls on all states to comport their maritime claims to the international law of the sea as reflected in the convention. The Philippines will release soon a new map that will include the West Philippine Sea within its jurisdiction, the National Mapping and Resource Information Authority said last week. Speaking during a press conference in the Philippines Presidential Palace, NAMRIA Administrator Peter Tiangco said the map will be published after the Implementing Rules and Regulations (IRR) for the newly signed Republic Act 12064, or the Philippine Maritime Zones Act, is released.
Nakalagay na doon.
Sir, sa new map kasama na yung West Philippine Sea.
Yes.
So, all areas where the Philippines has sovereignty and sovereign rights will be included in our new map.
The Philippines already have the maps prepared. Manila is just waiting for the implementing rules and regulations in order for us to modify or revise the maps we have prepared accordingly until its final publication. Asked to compare the new map with that one issued by China in August 2023, which incorporates Taiwan and most of the West Philippine Sea, Tiangco said, "The big difference here is that the Philippines' new map has a legal basis supported by existing laws." Earlier last week, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. signed the Philippine Maritime Zones Act that aims to declare the country's maritime zones in accordance with the standards set by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. The Maritime Zones Law uses the archipelagic baselines under the 2009 Philippine Baselines Law as the basis upon which the country's maritime zones are measured. Apart from identifying the Philippine internal waters, the law also defines the archipelagic waters, full entitlement of a 12 nautical miles territorial sea, declaration of a 24 nautical miles contiguous zone from the baselines, and the 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone and continental shelf where the Philippines can exercise sovereign rights and jurisdiction.
The first law is the Philippine Maritime Zones Act, which clearly defines the extent of our maritime entitlements and fully declares their metes and bounds in accordance with our Constitution and with the UNCLOS. Our people, especially our fisherfolk, should be able to pursue their livelihood free from uncertainty and harassment. We must be able to harness mineral and energy resources in our seabed. By defining and asserting our maritime zones, we project to the international community that we are staunchly committed to nurturing, cultivating, and protecting our maritime domain. The second law, the Philippine Archipelagic Sea Lanes Act, complements both our maritime and aerial policies by establishing a route system in our country's archipelagic waters and, as well, the airspace above it. The designated archipelagic sea lanes and air routes aim to facilitate safe passage for foreign ships and aircraft without compromising our national security, nor diminishing our capacity for good environmental stewardship. As part of the 14th Congress that passed the Philippines Archipelagic Baselines Law in 2009, this matter is close to my heart because these measures prove not only our commitment to ensuring the safety and prosperity of our maritime domain, but also our firm faith in our identity as a maritime nation. It is a spirit that transcends administrations. It is an intrinsic and undeniable part of the national, the Filipino character. It is my fervent hope that with the help of these two laws, we will continue to pursue and defend our maritime interests and navigate towards a brighter and stronger Bagong Pilipinas.
During the same press briefing, Senator Francis Tolentino said the signing of the Philippine Maritime Zones Act was an enforcement of the 2016 arbitral ruling that invalidated China's massive claims in the South China Sea. Tolentino, who sponsored the measure in the Senate, also expressed elation over the enactment of the law as well as the Philippine Archipelagic Sea Lanes Act. As the Philippines, reaffirming the extent of its country's maritime territories and right to resources, including in the South China Sea, draws reaction and angering Beijing, which claims the hotly disputed waterway almost in its entirety. The Maritime Zones Law's primary objective is to declare the Philippines' maritime zones based on the standards set by UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, clarify the geographical extent of the Philippine maritime domain, and at the same time, clarify the legal powers that the Philippines may exercise over. The upcoming law for Philippine Maritime Zone will be the basis for the updated version of the administrative map of the Philippines, which will specifically delineate the Calayan Island Group, Scarborough Shoal, Macclesfield Bank, West Philippine Sea, and Benham Rise region. The Philippines' 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone, west of the archipelago, will be called as West Philippine Sea. Beyond the 200 nautical miles, it is still officially referred to as the South China Sea. The Department of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines said, the law would codify the status and regime of the waters inside the archipelagic baselines, and redefine the extent of Philippine territorial sea, including the contiguous zone. The Maritime Zones Law, by delineating and underscoring the maritime zones and boundaries, can act as foundational policy that addresses various institutional roadblocks, advances the Philippines' national interest in terms of the protection, maximization, and sustainability of the marine resources, provides guidance on the rights and entitlements of the Philippines on different maritime zones, and can be utilized to maximize the goals of other relevant maritime laws of the Philippines. The maritime zones of the Philippines comprise the internal waters, archipelagic waters, territorial sea, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, and continental shelf. All territories of the Philippines shall generate their respective maritime zones in accordance with international law. Therefore, the Philippines exercises sovereignty and jurisdiction over its archipelagic waters and the airspace over defined maritime zone, as well as its seabed and subsoil, in accordance with the UNCLOS and other existing laws and treaties. It also highlights the country's extended continental shelf in the Philippine Rise and West Palawan regions. The Philippines filed the claim on the West Palawan regions before the United Nations Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf in June. The 2016 arbitral ruling, which deemed China's sweeping claim of almost all the South China Sea declared as invalid, is among the documents that make up the backbone of the proposed measure. This will be the first time that the term West Philippine Sea will be embodied, mentioned, and referred to in a law that will be passed by Philippine Congress. Once enacted, the law emphasis on Philippine sovereign rights and jurisdiction in the West Philippine Sea, particularly on exploration, exploitation, management of natural resources, and artificial islands and structures in the area. The Philippines Maritime Zones Law will be Manila's formal response to counters the 10-dash line of China's New Standard National Map, published August last year, which claims nearly the entire South China Sea as part of its territory. The area overlaps with the exclusive economic zones of the Philippines and those of Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam, and Indonesia. Chinese government has strongly opposed the bill and has lodged a solemn representation with the Philippine authorities. Experts warned that China's ability and determination to safeguard its sovereignty in the South China Sea should not be undervalued, and the Philippines will soon see more resolute, decisive, and powerful measures from China to defend its legal rights on the issue. China firmly opposes attempts by the Philippines to solidify the 2016 tribunal ruling of the South China Sea arbitration through domestic legislation, which China says unlawfully includes China's Huangyan Dao and most of the islands and reefs in the Nansha Islands in its maritime jurisdiction. This move indicates that the Philippines may further escalate its legal disputes against China in the future. Mid this year, the Philippines makes official submission to the United Nations on entitlement to an extended continental shelf in the West Philippine Sea. The proposal aims to delineate the outer limits of the continental shelf beyond 200 nautical miles in the South China Sea. The Philippines may also seek to bypass China and engage in maritime border negotiations with other countries. Additionally, there is a possibility of initiating new international lawsuits on issues such as marine environmental protection in the South China Sea. China's foreign ministry said it summoned the Philippines ambassador
Next
to
question,
China
please.
to lodge a stern protest.
大家好，中新社记者提问。据了解，菲律宾正式出台。
China News Service, we've learned that the Philippines officially enacted the Philippine Archipelagic Sea Lanes Act and the Maritime Zones Act. What's your comment? The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China has released a statement, has summoned the Philippine ambassador to China and make serious protests with it on the signing into law of these two acts. Let me stress that the so-called Philippine Archipelagic Sea Lanes Act illegally includes China's Huangyan Dao, most islands and reefs of China's Nansha and their adjacent waters in its maritime zones, and attempts to further enforce the illegal arbitral award on the South China Sea by domestic legislation. Such moves seriously violate China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests. We strongly condemn and firmly oppose it. China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests in the South China Sea are solidly grounded in history and law, comply with international law, including UNCLOS, and will not be influenced by the Philippines Maritime Zones Act. The so-called arbitral award on the South China Sea is illegal, null and void. China does not accept or recognize it. We oppose and do not accept any claim or action based on the award. Under the pretext of implementing UNCLOS, the Philippines attempts to support its illegal claims and actions in the South China Sea by approving the so-called Maritime Zones Act. Such an act seriously violates the DOC in the South China Sea and will make the situation in the South China Sea more complex. China firmly opposes any infringement and provocations adopted by the Philippines based on the act. China urges the Philippines to earnestly respect China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests. Stop at once any unilateral moves that may escalate the dispute and complicate the situation, and keep the South China Sea peaceful and stable. China reserves the right of taking all measures necessary. The Philippine Archipelagic Sea Lanes Act has many inconsistencies with the regulations of international law and resolutions of the International Maritime Organization. We ask the Philippines to earnestly abide by international law and not to undermine the lawful rights of all sides under international law, including UNCLOS.
What we see is an increasing demand by Beijing for us to concede our sovereign rights in the area, because of our need to explore and exploit the resources in these areas for the benefit of our own people. And that is clear. We don't need to enter into a geopolitical nexus for determining the root cause of the problem, because we are direct victims of Chinese aggression in this and in a concentrated area thus far in the West Philippine Sea.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the Republic of the Philippines, His Excellency Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr.
Senate President Chis Escudero, and the members of the Senate, the House Speaker Ferdinand Martin G. Romualdez, and members of the House of Representatives, the honorable members of the Cabinet, our key stakeholders and development partners in this effort that we are doing to safeguard the sovereignty of the seas of the Republic of the Philippines, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Today we gather for the signing of two very significant laws that emphasize the importance of our maritime and archipelagic identity. The Philippine Maritime Zones Act and the Philippines Archipelagic Sea Lanes Act. With these pieces of legislation, we align our domestic laws with international law, specifically the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, or UNCLOS, to improve our capacity for governance and reinforce our maritime policies for economic development and for national security. The first law is the Philippine Maritime Zones Act, which clearly defines the extent of our maritime entitlements and fully declares their metes and bounds in accordance with our Constitution and with the UNCLOS. This is essential in establishing the extent of our maritime jurisdiction and to ensure that our rights and duties as an archipelagic state are well defined in order that all Filipinos can rightfully enjoy the riches of our seas. Our people, especially our fisherfolk, should be able to pursue their livelihood free from uncertainty and harassment. We must be able to harness mineral and energy resources in our seabed. Maintaining the primacy of the UNCLOS and the 2016 Arbitral Award as our beacons in the maritime domain, the Philippines reaffirms its sovereignty, sovereign rights, and jurisdiction in our waters. By defining and asserting our maritime zones, we project to the international community that we are staunchly committed to nurturing, cultivating, and protecting our maritime domain. The second law, the Philippine Archipelagic Sea Lanes Act, complements both our maritime and aerial policies by establishing a route system in our country's archipelagic waters and as well the airspace above it. The designated archipelagic sea lanes and air routes aim to facilitate safe passage for foreign ships and aircraft without compromising our national security, nor diminishing our capacity for good environmental stewardship. These sea lanes will offer continuous, expeditious, and unobstructed transit for vessels and air transport, while obliging them to comply with navigational regulations and procedures, as well as with the air rules of flight safety and protocols. We are committed in implementing these ASLs in faithful accordance with the process found in the UNCLOS, while firmly upholding the principles of reciprocity and mutual respect amongst states. The passage of these two priority bills fully demonstrate our commitment as a responsible member of the international community and our advocacy to uphold rules-based international order. In the same breath, these signal our resolve to protect our maritime resources, preserve our rich biodiversity, and ensure that our waters remain a source of life and livelihood for all Filipinos. I convey my gratitude to our legislatures for their steadfast commitment to safeguard the interests of the Filipino people. This includes the assertion of our rights as an archipelagic state while fulfilling our obligations under international law. Bringing these bills forward took incredible commitment, as these have been deliberated since at least the 15th Congress. This long journey has been led by our maritime champions in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, supported by our dedicated team of public servants, technical and legal experts, academicians, and other stakeholders. To you who have collaborated and leveraged your wisdom and expertise to ensure the coherence and the soundness of these laws, I convey my appreciation, and so do the Filipino people. It is expected that the clarity of the extent of the maritime zones and the determination of the archipelagic sea lanes will impact domestic laws and regulations at the national and at the local level. I therefore call on all concerned government agencies and the local governments to review rules and regulations against these new laws with a view of undertaking the necessary steps for their effective implementation. As part of the 14th Congress that passed the Philippines Archipelagic Baselines Law in 2009, this matter is close to my heart because these measures prove not only our commitment to ensuring the safety and prosperity of our maritime domain, but also our firm faith in our identity as a maritime nation. It is a spirit that transcends administrations. It is an intrinsic and undeniable part of the national, the Filipino character. It is my fervent hope that with the help of these two laws, we will continue to pursue and defend our maritime interests and navigate towards a brighter and stronger bagong Pilipinas. Maraming salamat sa inyo lahat at magandang umaga.
Thank you, Mr. President.